Competitive edge. It's a phrase uttered by every company executive or business owner who is intended on winning over their fiercest adversary or closest competitor. For those who are intensely focused on the topic, they will strongly consider and execute a plan to infuse people with disabilities into their workforce. According to the Canadian Council of Rehabilitation and Work, when hiring practices are inclusive and support individuals with disabilities, your business will benefit from increased motivation, increased profitability, increased productivity, and increased ability to retain and recruit talented individuals with a disability, not to mention reduced training cost and an overall boost in morale for everyone involved in the company. For Wanda Deschamps, she's devoted her life to ensuring that those in the neurodiverse population have a seat at the table and an equal opportunity to rise up the ladder of influence at work. She's the founder of Liberty Co., whose goal it is to increase the participation of the neurodiverse population in the workforce through centering idea. She joined me this week to tell me how it works and how we can all promote an inclusive work culture at work. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. We began our discussion by outlining the different ways that Liberty Co. provides avenues of advancement for the neurodiversity population within the workforce.
Well, thank you, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity. Neurodiversity is a topic of great interest to me, and there's also that personal intersection because I was diagnosed with autism at midlife. And so I'm a member of the neurodiverse population. And for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with the term, it was coined by Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, to touch on differences in human brain makeup. And it does include autism, and I'm a member of the autism population. It also includes dyslexia and ADHD, and these are conditions that are perhaps well known to our listeners, but some others that maybe aren't as well known are as dyscalculia and dyspraxia. Perhaps aren't as well known. And the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is that the majority of the neurodiverse population is actually unemployed or underemployed. And this mirrors the sad reality of the disability population worldwide. Despite our skills and talents, they're not tapped. They're not tapped fully. And so Liberty Co. is about helping to change this, as you just mentioned. So I am working with organizations to build their capacity. And I'm working actually with each sector. So I am working with the private sector. I'm also working with the public sector, and I'm working with nonprofits as well. And it's about building their capacity to recruit and retain neurodiverse talent, because some of the programs we hear about, hiring programs, they are focused on, that first step, which is bringing employees in to be part of the team. But I want to make sure that employees are successful and that they actually stay with their employer. And I also want employers to be fully equipped in terms of helping support their neurodiverse employees. So that's what Liberty Co. is about.
Deschamps says that it's important that employers take a hand-on approach when it comes to building an inclusive workforce and including individuals with disabilities.
Well, there's so many things. I I think one thing that I'd like to touch on is that employers need to build and sustain inclusive workplaces. So when we look at previously underrepresented groups in our workforce, and that includes people with disabilities and not just previously underrepresented, but still currently underrepresented, the onus has been on the individual from the equity seeking group. We'll hire you and you'll change and you'll adapt. And I can say that people with disabilities have changed and have adapted. We change every day. We have to. Society is not designed for us. So changing and modifying and adapting is something that we do, and we do it well. When I go into organizations, I focus on it isn't the onus on the individual. It is a role that everyone needs to play, from the CEO to every member of the team, in creating and fostering an inclusive workplaces, because it's good for everyone. And so, for instance, something that I like to highlight is that accessibility and accommodations that may be brought forward for one person or group are actually good for everyone. So there's really no such thing as an accommodation for one person, because it will benefit everyone. And so, for an example, is closed captioning. So that was developed for those who have hearing challenges. And it's good for those for whom English is their second language. It is good for members of the neurodiverse population. And I can offer that sometimes it's very good for me because of the difference in my brain makeup. I am able to say, turn the volume down and rely on closed captioning. And so it really benefits me. I mean, that's just one example. There's so many examples in the disability conversation about design that's been brought forward that's been good for folks way beyond the disability population, but that's one that I like to touch on. So working with employers and really proposing and advocating for IDEA. So that's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And that diversity is better and inclusion's better. And that diverse and inclusive teams perform at a higher level. It's been proven that organizations that have diverse teams actually outperform their peers. So those are some of the things. There's so much more I could say. And when I present to organizations and when I talk to teams and I talk to leaders, I customize it for them. I customize it for their environment and base, because I always do research on what the organization's about and where they are currently. And so I customize it for them and I highlight, some specific things for them to consider based on their sector. But overall, those are some basic tenets that I always share.
So I'm wondering if you were given a 30-second opportunity for a 30-second sales pitch to tell employers about the positive benefits of hiring people with disabilities, what you might say.
Well, people with disabilities have tremendous skills and talents. They've largely been untapped. But organizations that promote and advance disability hiring can actually outperform their peers, because people with disabilities are really agile and adaptable. We have to be, because society is not designed for us. So we're often very loyal and high performing individuals, and we can actually often uncover solutions and approaches that might be overlooked by the mainstream population.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, I always tell employers when I talk to them, provides employers that hire people with disabilities a competitive edge over their competition because they come up with more innovative solutions. So I certainly agree with you there. And I'm wondering what's been the proudest moment for you working in the neurodiverse space and working on Liberty Cove as well?
Oh, there's so many. It's been incredible, Kevin. I want to share that it was an amazing moment last week when I saw a job posting from McGill, and it talked about their diverse hiring and that individuals from underrepresented groups were encouraged to apply. And they included neurodivergent in the posting. Now, I was not solely responsible for that. I'm not working with McGill directly. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this is the difference that we're starting to see. We're actually starting to see neurodiverse talent celebrated and recognized for what it is. And it's one job posting, but everything starts somewhere. And I'm not saying it's the first, it's not the first. It's just that we have seen more efforts in neurodiverse hiring with our neighbors in the South, and we've seen it more in big companies and particularly, big tech companies. So to see it in Canada and to see it in a university, that was really, really positive. There's so much more I could say, but that's recent and I think, hopefully relevant for our listeners.
Absolutely. And I'm also curious to ask you this question as well. When I talk to employers and they tell me they want to develop and foster an inclusive environment, and they just don't know where to start. So I tell them all the time that you have the platform to start a movement and to uh, develop environment of inclusivity. So I'm wondering your thoughts on what you would tell employers who are eager to develop an inclusive culture for people with disabilities in the workforce, but don't know where to start.
Yeah, it's such a great point, and this definitely comes up. So I believe that employers that can hire members of the disability community to lead your programs. So if you want to increase the talent level with people with disabilities, hire someone with a disability. Representation matters, and you need to see it to be it. So that's step one. That can be as an employee, that can be if a consultant, if you're looking at going down the consultant path. So that's step one. If you're not in a position to hire or you're not in a position to retain a consultant, there are lots of resources available online. And again, there's more and more. As we push forward in the inclusion revolution, emphasis on disability employment, as we push forward with understanding neurodiverse talent, there's more resources available. So Inclusion Canada, autism organizations, provincially, national autism organizations, for instance, in the area of autism employment. Go online, look at what the federal government has to offer. I was just there today on the website earlier today with looking at information that they promote about disability hiring. So make the commitment. Number one, you're going to follow through more so if you make the commitment. No, this is something that we're doing, and that really you're adhering to the point that disability is a dimension of diversity. So in so many diverse and inclusive hiring programs, there is an emphasis on race and ethnicity, religion, language, sexual orientation, gender, and those are all really, really important. And I always say, I'm not about taking anything away. I'm only about adding disability. So it's making a commitment that disability is always going to be there. And then specific avenues that I just mentioned, and knowing there's always lots available online, and there's lots available from other organizations too. So you're not Microsoft. Okay, fine. Doesn't mean you can't learn from Microsoft. The recent Ability Summit was free. Things like that. Publications. I just released this morning a post highlighting a recent report from the Diversity Institute and the Public Policy Forum, talking about building back better, talking about a more inclusive recovery. What did it include information about? People with disabilities. So there's so much available.
Yeah, I think employers also have to take the onus on themselves, because as you said, there's so much available, and a little research never hurt anybody, right? So absolutely.
And Kevin, if I could add, purposefully, there are resources on my Liberty Co website that are available, and there are resources on my LinkedIn profile that are available. So I am a for-profit business. This is what I do. However, I always make resources available. I have interviews on my website. I have links to articles on my website, and these are on my LinkedIn profile too. So anyone can go there, and it will also take them to links to other resources too.
Yeah, I always tell people that life is a constant game of learning, and resources and absorbing information is important. So I'll make sure that we put all of your information in the interview and in our show description as well, for sure. And I'm also curious to ask you about a small business. You just uh, went over the things that are available on a more broader sense. But I'm curious to zero in on small businesses that may not have a big HR department. As you know, I used to serve as the ambassador for the Discoverability Network, which is an online job matching portal, which was originally created because small businesses who wanted to hire didn't know where to find the talent. So I'm curious to ask you specifically about small businesses and how they can create a more inclusive culture.
That's a great point. And okay, so what I just said can be scaled. So appreciating you're a small business, you still have access to all the publicly available resources from public institutions. So from universities, from the Diversity Institute, from the Public Policy Forum. So the website, Inclusion Canada, the federal government resources, you as a small business owner have access to all of those. So those are great resources for you. If you're a small business and there is someone on your team who would be a great lead for this, I realize, it can't be a full-time job. You're not in a position to deploy that way. Is there someone who can really take ownership and look at those resources and look how they can be applied to you? Another thing I would say is if you're a small business or you're a small organization and you have volunteers, do you have volunteers, again, who can help you? People who do what I do, who do what you do. And because, I am an entrepreneur, I have to charge. This is what I do for a living. I do volunteer though. I do set aside a certain percentage of my time and my services for volunteer. So are there other folks who will do that for you? And they can, again, think in different ways and access information for you, perhaps in a different way than you would yourself if you're not a member of an equity seeking group. So those are some ideas. This is really, really important, Kevin. And to me, it's another reason why leading the standards has to come from the large organizations that have the resources. So that's both in the private, the public, and the nonprofit sector. So an organization I point to, Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Center, the first place that I learned about IDEA from, they're really leading the standard and they have the resources to do that. So other nonprofits that are smaller can learn from them. Microsoft has the resources. They have the human resources, they have the technical resources, they have the financial resources. So it's incumbent on them to lead the way, and they're doing it. So smaller organizations can learn from them. So I besides, giving some ideas for folks, I also wanted to share, where I really see the responsibility coming from. And I guess finally I would, public sector, and I always talk about universities because I spent a lot of time there, it's up to the larger universities. So Carleton's doing a great job in terms of accessibility. Smaller universities, smaller post-secondary, learn from them. Again, the information's there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about finding the resources and investing the time. If you want to be successful in business, you have to invest the time to perfect your craft. And if people are motivated to do this, they'll devote the time to do this. I always tell people that we devote the time to the priorities that are important to us, for sure. I'm curious to ask you about women specifically with disabilities, as I find you to be sort of a champion for disabilities and for women specifically. So I'm curious to ask you about where you think we are in advancing forward women with disabilities as well.
Yes, thank you. So my passion really intersects at the point of disability and gender. And we're behind. So when we look at where we are with disability employment, we're behind the mainstream population. And then when you start to look at specific groups within the disability population, like women, racialized individuals, Indigenous peoples, the picture becomes grimmer. And so this is one of the reasons why it is a priority for me. So in terms of the workplace, women with disabilities experience higher barriers to employment, and then they experience greater discrimination once they're in the workplace than compared to, say, white men with disabilities. So it's something that we really need to address. Within my interests, there's also a specific area of women with disabilities and entrepreneurship that I've been looking at. And so I had the really good fortune of being retained by the Diversity Institute for a project, a mapping exercise, actually, to understand the programs and supports available for women with disabilities in entrepreneurship or those who are considering entrepreneurship. And it was a really interesting exercise. We uncovered great programs that are there. We need more. And we need them to be more accessible. And actually, in terms of people with disabilities generally, we don't have enough research. We don't understand enough about the population. And then again, once you start to delve deeper into the population, women, racialized individuals, we know even less. And we really need disaggregated data. So, these are some of the things that I'm looking at. There's so much more that needs to be done. What I always say is the first step is awareness. And we're starting to be aware of how little we know, how much more we need to do. And if folks are interested, more information about the work that we did at the Diversity Institute will be made available later this year.
I'm curious to ask you about your greatest hope for the future when it comes to diversification in the workforce for individuals with disabilities.
Well, that we see these numbers change. You know, the vast majority are unemployed or underemployed, and there are so many different statistics. There's the disability population and unemployment. There's the disability population and unemployment according to certain categories like age and gender and so on. Then there's the unemployment levels for the neurodiverse population. And then within that, the autism population. So, I mean, there's so many different statistics, but the bottom line is the numbers aren't good. And so my greatest hope is that we change them and that we have a stark increase in the members of the disability population fully participating. And this is a hope of mine coming out of COVID. COVID has shone the spotlight on equality, not just the disability community, of course, Black Lives Matter, need for Indigenous reconciliation, newcomers, single parents, people of varying socioeconomic status. So this is the time. Horrific effects from COVID. What's the silver lining? What we've learned and the opportunity to go forward and blaze a better path. And so that's really my hope. And if we look at previous pandemics, and if we look at previous conflicts, you know, from an historical perspective, there have been positive outcomes because of what we've learned. So for instance, coming out of World War I, veterans were disabled. And we decided, okay, we need to treat our veterans much better. And so programs were opened, not nearly to the point that we needed them. And, you know, ableism persists today. But we have a real opportunity for economic justice and disability justice coming out of COVID. So let's seize it. Let's really take this moment, and that's what gives me hope.
You know, Wanda, the tagline for the Discoverability Network is seize the opportunity to advance your business. And I tell you that COVID has provided a great opportunity for businesses and employers to reevaluate their hiring practices and the way they move employees, for sure. I've got two more questions for you. The first is a two-part question having to do with the advancement of technology and how you think that has assisted people with disabilities to find, locate, and retain employment. And the second part of that question is, what do you see as the role of government in advancing forward in the employment rights of people with disabilities?
Well, proliferation of technology. I mean, Kevin, I could spend the whole day talking about this. I know you don't have the time. Huge. I mean, what technology has enabled for the disability community is like nothing we've ever seen before, you know, and talked about some of them earlier when I highlighted accessibility and options that have been brought forward, you know, and have benefited so many. And again, do they benefit just the disability community? No, they benefit everyone. So yes, this digital revolution has been just incredible. I mean, maybe the listeners, you know, might appreciate hearing, you know, for me. So as a neurodiverse population member, I mean, just one of the effects of my autism is that sometimes I struggle to attach words to concepts. So I know what I want to say, and I have an idea, but I can't get the specific word out. Well, I mean, because of the internet, I can look up words. So before Zoom and when we were using phone calls, if I was talking to someone on the phone, I would just be able to search. What that did for my communication, my confidence, I was able to be more specific. I mean, that is just one example, Kevin. There's so many examples, but yeah, technology, huge, huge. I do need to point out though, the digital divide. Okay, so 20% to the internet, huge barrier. We need to still tear down these structural barriers, and that is one. So we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. Government, well, that's one. So if I could just naturally segue here, and maybe you set me up. One of the things the government can do is really help erase that digital divide. Again, highlight it from COVID. Okay, so COVID, we kept saying, information's online, everything's online, applying for your benefits online. Okay, what about the 20% of the disability population that does not have consistent access to the internet? So that's a biggie for the federal government. The other thing for the federal government, or one other, I should say, there's so many, is continuing to promote and to advance the disability is a dimension of diversity. So the federal government, this one, has done so much for diverse populations. Again, so, the Prime Minister has been really proud, gender balance cabinet. Okay, but within that gender balance, we do have Carla Quattro, woman with a disability who's in the cabinet, and that's fantastic. But still keeping that front and center. And employment. Everything the federal government is doing in terms of disability employment, we need to see that continue. That is critical. And I guess I'll end by saying, it's critical not just for the individual, it's critical for our entire society, because disability employment creates a tremendous burden on the individual, even though it's not our fault. It creates a tremendous burden for society because unemployment costs. And we want to participate more as consumers. We know we need to contribute as taxpayers. We want to do this all at the level when we're fully participating as employees. There's so much more I could say, but I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to end this conversation by asking you if you've given any thoughts how you want your legacy to be defined.
My legacy is hopefully that I have taken my incredible privilege and, through my privilege, a platform to create a smoother path for others. That's what I want. I have suffered because I had a disability that was not diagnosed until a month before my 47th birthday. And it created a lot of hardship for me and a lot of misunderstanding with others. And it was unnecessary because I believe I had been diagnosed earlier, that it would have been better. It would have been better for me, and it would have been better for others. And I especially struggled at times in the workplace. And I want better opportunities for members of the disability population in the workplace. And that's part of inclusive workplaces for everyone to thrive.
Absolutely. And Wanda, I'm curious to ask you, if people want to get connected with you personally, what's the best way they can do that?
The best way is LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. Send me an invitation. I usually am better in a better position to respond if people, when they send an invitation, let me know, what it is that they might be interested in connecting about. So that's LinkedIn. And then my website, as I mentioned earlier, www.libertyco.ca. And there's a contact form on my website too, actually, and people do reach out to me through it who might not feel at first like they want to send out that LinkedIn connection. So those are some options. And then another thing is that, people tag me when people are on social and they see things that might be of interest, or, they want to bring to my attention, they want my comment, they tag me. And so those are some avenues.
Hey, Wanda, I really enjoyed our discussion about inclusive employment, neurodiversity, and learning a little bit about your personal journey. As you know, we have become social media friends, and I'm glad to virtually meet you in person today and to tap into your brain with your knowledge, expertise. And I want to thank you for being here this morning. It's most appreciated.
Oh, it's been great, Kevin. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I've learned from you. I knew I would because I've already learned so much from you online. And I look forward to keeping in touch. And yes, here's to actually seeing each other in person.
I tell people I'll never take for granted again the power of human connection in person. Isn't that the truth?
Here's to that.
So, Wanda, have a great day and thanks again for the time, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.